What is up, everyone? Welcome to Ginger Runner Live, episode what number is it? Is it 366?
That's what it says.
Welcome to episode number 366. A big episode tonight.
Did you forget to practice talking today?
I have. This is the first time I've talked all day. So bear with me while I learn the English language. Welcome to the show tonight. We're very excited because we get to welcome our dear friend, our coach, David Roche is going to join us on the show for another Ask Coach Roche. I believe this is the 10th. This is the 11th Ask Coach Roche episode. Long overdue. It's actually been a couple months since we've had David on, so we're excited to bring him on tonight. So if you've got questions in regards to running, training, life in general, these episodes always turn out to be some of our favorites. Tonight, I'm sure, is not going to be any exception. So get your questions ready. Tonight's show begins now. Ginger Runner. Yay! What is up, everyone? I almost cut you off guard.
I was late.
It's okay.
I showed up late.
I'm learning how to talk. All is well. Welcome to the show, everyone. Ginger Runner Live, episode number 366. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy Mondays to spend a little bit of it with us. We're excited about tonight's show because we get to welcome our dear friend, our running coach, David Roche is going to join us on tonight's show for another Ask Coach Roche. This is the 11th time we've had him on for this series. This has sort of been this ongoing series where every month, every couple of months, we bring David on to answer your questions in regard to your training, your preparation for a race, any questions about life. Tonight, we have tons of questions already lined up from our Discord server, from our Patreon crew, from our live chat. So if you have any questions for David during tonight's show, of course, just jump into the live chat and ask away. Kim, you're going to grab them. The questions.
You just stole all my lines for the top of the show.
I'm sorry. Do you want me to? Are you going to?
If we can just cut that out.
Yeah, we'll delete that.
Edit in right here.
It's already done. It's already deleted.
Hi, everyone. Kim Tashima Newberry. Welcome. Ethan already introed the chat room. If you're in there, say hi. If you're new, let us know. We're getting new people every week. It's really fun. It's always really fun also to see our regulars come back. So as Ethan mentioned, if you have questions for wonderful Coach Roche, please ask them here.
Before we, of course, introduce Coach Roche, we do have to mention our GR crew. It is because of them that we're able to do these shows live every single Monday. We also do a daily live show called Daily Brew, where we just chat about whatever over cups of coffee or beers. And honestly, the topics of conversation lately have gotten pretty crazy. They've been super fun. And we do end up sprinkling a little bit of running in there, the running conversation sometimes. But if you would like to join our GR crew, it's very easy to do. You just got to head on over to patreon.com/thegingerrunner. For as little as $2 a month, you get access to our after shows, like tonight's after show with David, all of our daily live streams, a whole bunch of really cool behind the scenes perks and stuff like that. Two individuals in particular at that top tier, we like to just recognize at the beginning of every Ginger Runner Live episode. Brian Sands. Brian Sands is a longtime supporter, longtime crew member, truly inspiring individual. Ran his first marathon, his first 50K. Last year ran his first 100-miler. He's a stellar ultra runner, athlete, and again, just one of the kindest, most generous people that we know. We're honored to have him as a friend and as a crew member. And Rick Bjarnison. Rick is a British Columbian trail runner, ultra runner, and just recently attempted the Sinister 7 in Canada, which is a super spicy 100-mile race. But he and his company, cheekymonkeymedia.ca, they redid the gingerrunner.com website. He and his team do amazing stuff on websites or website maintenance or stuff like that. Cannot recommend them enough. They've been super wonderful and super supportive. So thank you, Rick. Thank you, Brian. We appreciate you both.
And also just really quick, a quick sending of all of our love to the area where Rick actually lives and works. There's wildfires ripping through BC still currently where my folks are and also around where Rick is. So
even in the most recent couple of days, it's just kind of taken off. So Rick, sending you lots of love and everyone that we know up there, which is a significant number of people. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest. He's been on the show a number of times. We know him inside and out. It was what my brain wanted to say, but I don't know if that
seems inappropriate.
Our guest, David Roche.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I was following the wildfires is very is a little difficult. So anyone, dealing with that, so sorry. It's one of those times where I think this either smoke or fires are affecting probably so many people watching this, and it can make you kind of feel a little bit of a background like depression almost, even if it's not an acute thing you're experiencing. I'm reminded of if you've seen the Bo Burnham special on Netflix, Inside. Really recommend it. But there's a song in there called That Funny Feeling, which is, and the funny feeling they're referring to is the quiet comprehending of the ending of it all. And I think fires really bring that feeling home. So if you have some like generalized, just something within you that just feels unmoored right now, I think a lot of people are alongside you, and cut yourself so much slack.
It's something that we've been talking about on Daily Brew. It's something that has been ongoing, this conversation just in regards to fire, because here on the West Coast particularly, and I know you're affected by it in Colorado too, David, all last year, all this year. It's just been this ongoing, it's ominous when the smoke rolls into town, or when you have friends or family who are being evacuated on a regular basis, like every couple of weeks. It's like, oh, there's a new alert. We got to move, or we got to pack up bags and stuff. There's just this kind of background weight. And you throw that on top of a pandemic, which is also this background weight. I feel like we're all dealing with a lot without maybe realizing it on a regular basis.
Yeah, no, for sure. And to do a sharp transition, my other debate, the way I was going to intro myself, is that multiple times you called me your dear friend. And I was like, I really just need to, when the camera finally pans to me, it's just a deer. It's one of the ongoing bits that Megan and I have, is whenever I'm driving or something, she'll say, deer. And I'll be like, honey? Hasn't made her laugh yet, but I'm hoping one of these days I'll get a chuckle.
Well, you got us going, because now I'm like literally picturing, I'm sure there's an effect that I could do if I took a couple minutes to put a deer head on your head.
Dear friend.
We actually would like to welcome our dear friend, David Dear Roche. We'll do that at some point in the future. First,
it's good to have big goals.
Setting the bar high already, I can tell. First, congratulations to you. I believe there was a victory in your recent history
like a couple victories.
Maybe a couple victories at various races in the mountains at various distances, just all around crushing of the trails in the mountains.
And we know you love talking about yourself.
Yeah, let's start talking to you about yourself.
Yeah, that's just my jam. No, I've had so much fun recently. It's just cool that there are options to do these races, and to be around people and celebrate that, even knowing, again, referring back to this heavy weight that kind of is in the background, almost like a horror movie monster that you never see, or the shark in Jaws, which is kind of like the Delta variant too. And I'm hearing now people are starting to talk about marathons and international racing. For a lot of our athletes that were on Team USA, the World Championships for trails was canceled. That was supposed to be in November in Thailand. So, I'm always drawing it back to I feel like you start with the depressing stuff, because then it lets us build up to the future. But, so right now I'm just really trying to cherish every opportunity to get out there and, experience these things after the last year and not knowing exactly what's to come in the future.
San Joaquin Running, welcome new member, San Joaquin Running in the chat saying, and FKT. That's right. David also got an FKT.
San Joaquin Running. Is that, I assume that's Nate. Nate is the biggest badass. He's such a cool dude, who inspires me all the time because of how he balances parenting and business and running and all of his other pursuits. And flooring, actually. He does flooring. Like, he's one of those people. Actually, that's a concrete recommendation everyone can take. If you hire other people to do your flooring or other things like that. If you're moving, if you're doing anything, hire someone. Even if it is like you're not that financially secure, it's worth it. You'll figure it out. It's too much to worry about when you start doing your own house projects.
I think that was exactly what you recommended in our running logs, because we moved a while back, and it was one of those like, David, things are going to get crazy next week, and you're just like, hire it out.
Just hire people.
Don't do it yourself. I was like, I don't think we can. You're like, You can, and you will.
I don't care if you have to like sell a kidney. It is worth it. And the sacrifice, I mean, that's one thing that coaching gives you a window into all these different repeated human experiences, right? So I have no understanding or knowledge. I would have definitely tried to do all this stuff myself. And then you see people put themselves through the worst suffering and worst stress. I mean, there's a reason, for example, that moving is one of the top few stresses that anyone ever experiences in every survey and every psychology study. And I think a lot of it just comes down to we do stuff that we are not equipped for and not trained for. And so I'm fully on board of sit down, sip a daiquiri, and let someone else lift your shit. Or stop.
You can say shit. It's okay.
Yeah.
You can say daiquiri.
You're
it's fine.
a dear friend.
You're a deer. You can say whatever you want. The fact you're talking is a miracle. I kind of want to start. We were sort of mentioning the fires there at the beginning, and obviously, David, you're a very experienced coach. We don't need to establish your long resume of not only.
But we can if you'd like us to talk about.
We can spend the next 45 minutes,
more.
but I don't think we need to.
You know my inside too, not just my out.
Inside and out. Inside and
I
out.
just want a resume, but only inside. That's it.
Bloody.
Pizza.
Pizza. Cereal.
No, you start in the intestine, and no. But I'm curious to hear where this line is going.
Me too. Talking about sort of the wildfires, everything that's sort of weighing on people right now. We just had here in Seattle, specifically, AQI numbers that were high. We've had higher. I know that there's regions here in the United States and Canada where the number is higher. But it was at a point here locally where we were like, it's not safe to go out. It was around 160, 170 in our little neck of the woods. And we mentioned that in our running log, and you're like, yes, avoid high AQIs and stuff like that. This is something that is this ongoing issue that we're having to deal with each summer and each fire season and stuff like that. Are you noticing a trend amongst your runners where AQI is now becoming part of the discussion, where you're having to ask athletes to train indoors or alternate means to get the fitness going? Like, how has that been as a coach who coaches athletes around the globe?
I should have been able to put my backgrounds together to understand that this was going to happen. So I was a climate and atmospheric science undergrad specialty, and then also did a master's in this stuff when I was at law school. So, but never really put two and two together that these climate models that back when I was in school in the early 2000s were saying the West was going to burn every year starting in 2030, and it just so happens that we've jumped the gun a little bit. And a lot of these projections the gun has been jumped slightly. And it's disheartening because part of the reason that I ended up leaving that field was seeing just how much it felt like you were banging your head into a wall with any sort of systemic change. But I think that underscores the need to figure out ways to adapt on a broad scale. And that mostly thinking about, okay, do we make sure vulnerable people and vulnerable populations aren't that affected by climate change? But then when you're thinking specifically about runners, we also need to think about how we're going to adapt, because this is the new normal, unfortunately. Hopefully it doesn't affect, anyone that's listening to this personally with their homes or their families, but, just by the odds, it's going to. And so with these high AQIs, the general principle here is that high AQI is elevated PM 2.5. So the fine particulate matter that's really small. So these are essentially the ash that comes from the fires. It also gets released by things like tailpipes. It's very common type of pollution that you'll see anywhere. And so all the studies on it really come from more background pollution than wildfires, though a lot of studies are starting to come from wildfires. And that background pollution data is pretty darn scary. So the study that always jumps out to me is this one that took place in China a few years ago, where in half of student dormitories, they used a sham air purifier. So it acted like an air purifier, but it didn't actually purify the air. And the other ones, they put a real air purifier in the room. These numbers were kind of equivalent to what we'll see in some like smoke days. After a few weeks, the people with sham air purifiers had almost all of their biomarkers like knocked down, particularly cortisol went way up. So there's clearly some chronic exposure issues that does happen. And so 1 day or 2 days in the smoke, probably not a huge deal unless you're a sensitive person. More than that really starts to add up. So what that means for athletes is we really like athletes to not run outside if the AQI is 100 or above. unless they know 100% they have no background issues and they're not running hard. So, above that, the mask works. Like if you get one of the N95 masks, you can even get one at a hardware store that they use for sanding, which has the extended thing so you can breathe fully in it. That's going to be really helpful. They do filter out a lot of the PM 2.5. If not, indoor options are going to be key in the future, in the summer, just like in the winter.
It's just kind of crazy that this is part of the conversation now. Obviously, there's a lot going on that's contributing to this, but it is a conversation that we've had with you in the last couple of years. Like, do we train in this? Do we go out and get our long run in it? It's something that we just talked about this last weekend. Our AQI numbers did improve. We had some offshore flow that came in and sort of pushed that out, so we were able to get some runs in. But we had crew members who reached out that were like, had races prepped, and the race was going forward. It wasn't canceled or anything like that, but AQI numbers above 200, 250, stuff like that, where you would look at that and go, you got to ask yourself, is this worth putting your health at risk or jeopardizing future runs or that sort of thing? When presented with that sort of information and it's a race or it's a big key run or something, what would you tell an athlete?
So I think it gets back to individual health characteristics primarily. So if someone is fully healthy, has no history of asthma, no history of heart disease or cardiovascular issues, even in their families, then a smoke exposure or two, as long as it's not like breathing in 800 AQI, is all the studies indicate is not going to cause severe harm. It's usually subsequent exposures that do a little bit more chronic exposure. This isn't like, arsenic or something. It is something that our bodies need to filter, but it's not a direct poison right on the go in a way that is extremely detrimental. So when it comes to racing, I tell every athlete, like, if it's above 125, don't mess with it, don't race. But you usually don't know that until the morning of the race. Like a lot of the time, even smoke forecasts aren't reliable. So you need to be comfortable with that uncertainty. For example, the mountain champs, the US Mountain Running Championships were this weekend. And the day before the race, the AQI was like 180 in Oregon. And the day of the race, the AQI was fine. And I wouldn't have wanted, most of the athletes racing if the AQI was 200. But there are some athletes, though, that if they, it's their biggest race, if the race had gone ahead in that AQI, I would say, it's probably going to be fine. And this is the type of calculated risk that you can make the decision. So I try not to jump in and be like, this is right or wrong, because I think, one, the studies indicate that there really is no direct right or wrong because we're always absorbing some sort of risk in our lives. And two, it's highly personal. As long as you understand that some of the health consequences aren't just related to like, oh, my lungs hurt a little bit, or, oh, I'm coughing. It's also related to, oh, my heart is being affected by this in a way that could have longer term health impacts, particularly if I do it all summer. Got
it. I also realized during that Addie dog is behind you on the couch. I thought it was a pillow. And then Addie moved and I was like, that is not a pillow. That is the deer's best friend, Addie.
Yes. I've still been fetching her in the smoke. I feel like I should probably write an article, or there should be studies on dog AQI. I mean, there might be, because right now she's running really well. So maybe she's the exception that proves the rule.
She loves a good high AQI.
Oh yeah, just when the air has that little bit of like a aftertaste, she just swirls it around. Yeah, actually, I was reading something about that. I'm not sure if this is 100% true, but what I was reading was talking about how, like, sommeliers, there isn't any standardization across sommeliers. So like they'll say different things for the same like wine or whatever. Nothing fascinates me more than an entire field that's essentially based on like a vague amount of bullshit. I mean, I'm sure it's real. I'm sure there are real things being perceived, but if that's true, that's rather hilarious.
I can't tell you how many documentaries we've watched specifically about sommeliers, and sat there and just.
If you
like,
have not watched them, Somm. I know this isn't running related, but Somm is great. It was one of those like. This is what you can taste fresh cut garden hose and wet concrete in this wine. Are you like bullshitting me?
Where are you getting this? But then they're able to identify the exact region a wine comes from, like blind, like, oh, this comes from the Bourguignon region of France or something like that. And you're like, how do you determine that based off of fresh cut garden hose and concrete taste.
I take it all back. I'm sorry for besmirching the good name of wine tasters out there.
A large majority of our audience are Psalms. And
yeah, I know.
There's a lot of crossover.
There's this one moment they're like, oh, this is my moment to shine. And here we are just like, it's bullshit.
Yeah.
They're not here to defend themselves.
I was thinking that I'll just use this time to do a flip in my public persona and mainly just try to start attacking various professions and jobs. I mean, next, first responders. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh man. I mean, 1 million view podcasts. Let's be honest. That's how we got to get the views somehow.
Yeah.
I do want to point out that we are live with David Roche, Coach David Roche. He is here to answer your training, running related questions, life related questions, whatever they might be. Every time that we bring him on, again, he's very insightful. One of our favorite humans on the planet Earth. I don't know why I emphasize that.
The planet Earth. Like we have other David friends on other planets.
Other planets. But Kim, you have a couple of questions pulled from the live chat. If you are watching live, jump into the chat here, ask those questions. We can get them for David during the show. But Kim, what do you got?
Yeah, this first question comes from our Discord server, and it comes from CB Chappelle. And they ask, David, my kids are my alarm clock. We get up and then I put them in the double stroller for 5 miles or 1 hour, whichever comes first with the double stroller. I never eat first. Thoughts on eating versus sleeping for those with littles? Meaning, is it more important to get a little bit of extra sleep, or should I eat before I get out the door for my run?
I love that question. It's something actually that comes up a lot in coaching because we are not proponents of fasted running for female athletes in particular. A number of reasons for that, primarily due to the elevation in cortisol and subsequent disturbance of sex hormones that can happen from fasted running. That also applies to men, though testosterone provides a little bit more of a buffer in that. So that is also something that people that might do an early shift face, or anyone that has to wake up really early and get out very rapidly to run. And we still recommend, particularly for women, to eat something. That doesn't need to be a meal. It can be something very quick. Like I remember when Megan was doing her 3 a.m. wake ups during rotations, she would often do chocolate or something tasty that would get her out of bed and get her excited. And it doesn't have to be much, just to get some, blood glucose in the system, so that your body isn't immediately trying to strain to call on its glycogen stores, because the aerobic metabolism is instigated in a carbohydrate fire. And so if you run fasted first thing in the morning, you might have a little bit of trouble starting that fire. It might cause a little bit more hormonal strain than is necessary. So, I mean, it can be something that's healthier, like a few bites of a bar, or it can be even something a dark chocolate peanut butter cup or something simple like that, that makes it more exciting to wake up each morning. But either way, I think there can be a lot of benefit to not doing this fasted running all the time for female athletes, because 1 or 2 is fine. But if you're doing it all the time, the body's probably going to start making some maladaptations across your trajectory that might not be totally helpful.
That's interesting. I remember early in my ultra running days, fasted running was recommended to me by a bunch of people, teach your body how to handle a run where you're not getting calories, almost like a depletion run where you're running your body to full depletion or to full bonk, a 20-mile run without any calories or something like that. And it always seemed counterintuitive. It always seemed like, why am I doing this?
But why?
Yeah, but why?
So, but why? It's a fascinating area of science. So the reason I distinguish between male and female there, and or transgender listeners have other considerations, but probably align with where your hormones align, is that essentially what it amounts to is that women's aerobic metabolism is pretty darn optimized via the presence of estrogen as it is. So specific depletion running isn't going to cause particularly that many adaptations. In fact, there's a 2011 study that did a controlled training stimulus with athletes that were fasted. And what they found is that the men actually had increased markers of adaptation, so essentially protein expression from fasted training. The women had the reverse, and actually had increased adaptation from training in a fueled state and had reduced adaptation in the other state. And so it gets back to that hormonal context. So for men, there can be some benefit. That doesn't mean that, like, I think it's been grossly overstated in a way that makes people better at putting out less power, which is not what we want. But for our male athletes that we coach, we're much more laissez-faire about it. Like, you can do like what you need to do to get by on this run. We want our high performance runs to be fully fueled, but don't worry about it too much. For the female athletes we coach, we try to step in and say, almost no matter what, make sure you're constantly keeping that glycogen as high as you can in the context of, or with an understanding that it's going to be difficult in long runs to avoid some depletion. But however much we can avoid, there's some studies on within day deficits that really point this out. Even avoiding a little bit of that can cause much better long-term trajectories.
Super interesting. Okay. Tons of questions. Go for it.
First of all, Jean in the chat room asked, where do I ask these questions on Discord? So we do have on our Discord server, there is a Ginger Runner Live channel. So you guys are always welcome to ask questions there prior to us going live, and I'll pull them.
Yep.
But Jean did ask a question in the chat room as well. They ask, using a road marathon training plan for an 85K trail race in October, already doing intervals, tempo, replacing my long run with a long trail run. What else would you add to that?
I think that's basically the perfect strategy. And it gets back to one of the complicating factors of ultra training in general, is that the fastest version of you, the one that has the highest running economy, will also have the highest ceiling at any of the ultras you're doing, even ones that are 200 miles long or in the mountains or anything like that. The difference is that there are some specific stresses that need to be considered. So when you're thinking 85K trail, I think, when you're thinking like a 50 mile or something, what you're really starting to worry about there is that the eccentric contractions, as the muscle lengthens under load, which can happen on downhills or just happen when you're super fatigued after a few hours, cause like micro trauma to the muscle. Essentially, there's some emerging theories that it might be related to the nervous system. It really doesn't matter for our purposes. The big idea here is that there starts to be more breakdown. So you want that running economy really high, but even if the running economy is high and you're able to run at a certain percentage of aerobic threshold all day in terms of like your underlying physiology, if the muscles break down, you're screwed. And that's when you get that, like, my heart rate's low, but I just can't really go fast anymore. I don't know what's going on with my body. So aside from the fueling practice that you're probably doing, which is really important, the other thing is to make yourself resilient against these eccentric contractions. The number one way to do that is to make sure your trail runs have significant amounts of downhill in them. Downhills really are the silent killers of ultras. But even if you're doing a flatter ultra, those downhills can really help against that, against those eccentric contractions. Two is just basic strength work. We have the mountain legs and the speed legs routines online. Both of those are essentially designed to harness this eccentric contraction pattern in just a few minutes. And that background stimulus can make it so that once you hit like later in a race, you're not limited by like your musculature, your muscle endurance. You're more limited by your aerobic system, which is exactly what we want. Because if you're doing marathon training, your aerobic system is badass. But our muscular endurance will all hit certain limits no matter who we are. Like even for people like Claire Gallagher or Courtney DeWalter.
That's interesting. There was sort of a follow-up question, I think, in regards to sort of what you were saying there from Evelyn in the chat here. Why a trail run versus the long road run? I get the intervals and tempo runs. Is it the technical? So maybe that's sort of like a follow-up just in regards to the style.
Perfect. Yeah. And it all gets back to the requirement, essentially, of doing these eccentric contractions in training. And so that comes from downhill primarily. Uphills are basically speed pointed up a little bit. Like whatever your running economy is, all the studies say, and outside of very, very steep grades where you're either going to be hiking or moving very slowly, it's basically the same thing. But downhills are a very different stress. So while running economy might correlate a little bit, the eccentric contraction patterns are totally biomechanically different. So whereas uphill is concentric for the most part, that there is some eccentric floating, those eccentric contractions can't really be trained. And we all know that feeling. So if you've never done lunges and you do lunges right now, you're going to wake up and your butt's going to be sore as heck tomorrow from like this stress that seems like nothing. What is that all about? And the same thing can happen in running if you're not loading that pretty consistently. So if you have that option of doing those trail runs with enough vert to keep adapting, that's great. But even if you don't, even if you live in a flat area, going somewhere every 4 to 6 weeks where you can do this type of loading, like driving a few hours for a little weekend on trails, really is beneficial. Like, as much as there's all these articles saying this is how to train for an ultra from a flat place, I'm like, you're always going to be undercutting what you're capable of if you're doing an ultra with hills in it, if you don't get to them just a little bit for that stimulus. But it doesn't take that much reinforcement. Studies indicate about once a month should be plenty for most people.
Once a month seems so much less than I would have anticipated, just to get a little bit of muscle memory or a little bit of engagement in the.
It gets back to that little thing I just mentioned briefly, that some of the emerging theories of why this exists is not exactly the muscles tearing, which is what it's always thought to be. It's that the end of the muscle spindle has these nerve endings that essentially get like traumatized out. And once that happens, the same effect occurs even without necessarily the underlying trauma. That being said, the trauma still is a factor. I mean, if you look at blood tests after ultramarathons, I mean, I'm sure there's people on this that have seen these creatine kinase levels through the roof, to where if you go to a doctor, they will admit you to the hospital and say you can't leave, even though it's a normal thing that happens in ultras. The way to protect your body against that is you need to do some of it in training. Once a month is what the studies say. Obviously, as a coach, I would much prefer it to be 2 to 3 times a week. But if you do live in a flat place, little training camps can get the job done and help someone perform to their potential, as long as they're doing the strength work to reinforce it in the other time, like the interstitial period.
So then my follow-up is it more beneficial to, let's say you have a 15-mile run, a 20-mile run or something that does incorporates a little bit of uphill, a little bit of downhill, sort of using it as a long-distance training run. Is it beneficial to push those downhills, or is that something that should be saved for your workout or specific days that week? Or when can we use that tool to our advantage to help ready our bodies?
The original way of programming it in, one, doesn't matter too much how fast you go. Like, in fact, sometimes slower running might cause more eccentric contractions. But the neuromuscular patterning of learning to run downhill faster is the ultimate way to improve trail and ultra running performance. It is the free speed that you can always call on, even at mile 99, no matter what. Whereas the uphill is going to vary a lot based on how the day is going and things like that. Almost every single breakthrough long ultra we've had in SWAP, like including at the top professional level, they always talk about how it's like one, it's this person's speed or this whatever. All of a sudden, I'm like, that person is obviously all those things, but there's also 30 other people that are at that start line. What it really is their ability to run downhills fast and efficiently on tired legs at the end of races. So we really like easy, moderate long runs where athletes can run the downhills with purpose. With purpose doesn't mean pushing or anything like that. It means not practicing putting on the brakes constantly, because a lot of us are tempted to just tiptoe down downhills all the time, when if we can just train the neuromuscular and biomechanical system to understand that, look, my heart rate's not high, there's nothing particularly stressful about this. The only thing stressful about this is the motion patterning of it. And that can be learned. That's a learned skill rather than a trained skill necessarily. So the way to learn anything, do it. To figure out a few basic principles of how to run downhill well, primarily very quick feet, keeping your eyes like a few steps ahead, not just straight at your ground, and then really relaxing. Do that, apply it, and I think almost anyone can become a badass downhill runner, and with that, a badass ultra runner, because that is the limiter a lot of the times at these races, particularly when you're talking about things like cutoffs. It's like, an athlete that learns to run downhill should be able to stay ahead of that, almost, even if they're hiking, almost everything else.
Wow.
That's what I always say. I mean, I'm obviously not running right now, but I always say my downhill running is my saving grace for actually making cutoffs.
Yeah, like anytime I get the opportunity to run with you, anytime a downhill is incorporated into that workout, you leave me in the dust. Like a downhill section for you this is my freedom.
That's when I pass people.
Yeah,
and that gives me like a little bit of like breathing room for like knowing I can make the cutoff.
For the next 3 days, my quads are like, I can't feel my quads, and you're like, well, that's too bad. Because I can.
That's sad.
That's sad. It's so sad
I want
for
to
you.
second the fact that Kim is a total badass.
Total badass. Dear.
I'm a deer.
Let's get to more live questions, because I feel like there was a bunch that came through during that session.
Yeah, there's a question from Mac in the chat room. Mac asks, David, how do you personally stay positive through life's ups and downs?
What's your secret
Oh my
sauce?
gosh.
What's the secret
I
sauce? And I mean, I will also add that you constantly are showing up for all of your athletes every day and providing all of us with that light that we often need. So,
well, thank you. I mean, I think is the answer. And I think it would be for anyone, right? It's that you're like the reason that I try to, like, anyone that hears me blather on enough knows that I'm grounding everything in like death, mortality, fires, bad jokes about first responders, whatever it is, you know. And the reason is like whatever darkness there is, we all have it to a certain extent. I mean, obviously, mental health contexts make it so that some people can't see beyond that, and for those people, it's like that is so hard. And I'm very fortunate that, like, I think my brain chemistry is pretty stable. That would change things, but I think it really is about peering over the edge constantly and persistently and understanding exactly what the broader context is. You know, so memento mori or whatever from Stoicism is commonly said, almost like you can almost see like it being on a little pearl necklace or something, or a one of those ones that you would get at the beach, or the chokers that people would wear back in the 90s. But you know, remember that you will die and things like that. And the reason is just, oh man, if we're all dealing with that stuff and all dealing with, like, as The Good Place said, this constant sadness that all of this is impermanent. Hopefully, like, what I can do in that context is just share that with people, and then also provide as much light as I can. One, because that shines back on me, and two, because, like, what else are we going to do with our time, you know? So yeah, something actually that the Bo Burnham's Inside made me think a lot about. I mean, that is stuck. I haven't seen it in months, but it stuck with me so much since we last talked, really, like right after that. And it stuck with me so much because what he's doing there is essentially taking the same set of facts I'm saying right now and going the other direction and saying, look, we all die. We're inside all the time. A lot of this stuff is pointless. The quiet comprehending of the ending of it all and coming to a place of almost shared dismay. And I totally value and understand that perspective and think it's just as right as any other. But on the flip side, you talk about like Ted Lasso, or if anyone's seen that, where it's the reverse, starting from all those same first principles and coming to a place of like love and forgiveness. So I don't think there's a right answer to that. I mean, each one is valid. Each one is probably a very honest view of the universe, but I hope I can choose love and forgiveness, even when my first impulse is to choose, like, you know, destruction and dismay.
I feel like Bo Burnham's Inside affected me in a really profound way, and I think a lot of people who've watched it agree. It's not something I expected. I'd heard a lot of just amazing things about it before we saw it, but after watching it and having that connection to someone just through creating stuff, just being a creator and trying to connect with people through the medium, whether that's through film or through music or any of that sort of thing, I just had this real connection to it. But it was so much more profound than I anticipated. I think there was just a lot of deeper meanings, and I found myself nodding my head a lot and making mental notes from things. So if you have not seen it, people who are watching have not seen it, please
When
do.
did you start on YouTube?
2006.
Wow. So I mean, that also is fascinating because I remember one of the songs he says 14 years of it, like of his creative life. So you both came into YouTube. You were before him, actually, or probably about the exact same year. Like you were probably
YouTube was created in 2005, and we were
okay,
yeah. But he was,
so,
I mean, he was younger than I was when he started.
Oh yeah,
like 2006. Like he was a kid, you know.
What I mean is like the creative process of experimenting publicly is probably something that you identify with so massively in the very specific way he is referring to that almost very few other people will understand in that same direct way. Like I understand it by analogy, you know,
Sure,
you understand it by like literal, you know, video upload circa 2006. That must have been a trip to see.
Yeah, when the internet was like brand new and speeds were ridiculous. But I think there's this thing about that piece, his piece, that is transcendent beyond just people who have been on YouTube. So people who have created are drawn to his work of art. All of my YouTube creator friends from back in the day to present all have just shared in their unanimous love of his project because they can immediately connect to it, connect to him as a creator and to his art. But what's really cool is how it has transcended to people who maybe aren't familiar with the platform or its optics or its algorithms and are still drawn to the messages within the songs. And that is what I really feel was a success with his piece, was that it is deeper than just let's talk about social media, let's talk about uploads, let's talk about the history of YouTube and that sort of thing that he sort of mentions throughout it. It has deeper meaning. I sort of wanted to dovetail with that question for you in regards to the weight that you carry as a coach, because oftentimes full disclosure, David is our coach. He's been our coach for a number of years now and has helped Kim and I through just so much, whether it's running related stuff, through life related stuff. Sorry, David.
Clarification. I'm your dear coach.
Dear coach.
Oh,
He coaches our deer. We have a deer. It's inside.
His name's Gus.
His name is Gus.
Right there.
But throughout all of this, we realize, and David, maybe this is more personal, but I feel that oftentimes I don't want to burden you with the weight that I feel often in training. So maybe I'm having a bad training day or a bad week or a bad month, going through some rough life stuff. I don't necessarily want to burden you with that because I know that you probably have 100 other athletes who are also burdening you with the rest of their stuff. And how do you, I know that you sort of answered this, but I'm actually just generally curious. Do you have a means to lift that weight off of your shoulders so you are able to process your athletes or at least guide them in a way that doesn't add more weight to yourself? Or is that a difficult line to find?
So, I mean, I would actually say it's kind of the opposite for me. And maybe it's a personality defect or something, but I imagine some people identify with this, is that people trusting you to the point that they say anything to you, at least for me, is a source of lightness, even when it's a heavy subject. I think because so much of what we feel amounts to feeling alone, feeling lost, feeling like we're a wave that is cresting and is going to go back into the ocean and exist no longer. I mean, all of that comes from this feeling of just not existing in like a broader context, And so for me, I mean, the coaching part, like I really care about people's running, but what is the most meaningful about it of all is getting to see the rough shit, and getting to be just a little bit of a supportive presence, making my own mistakes, helping sometimes, all that stuff. It's almost like I think, therefore I am, I coach, therefore I am. And to me, it's like a lot of comfort to be a part of your and Kim's life at all.
I have thought heavily on this. And every week, David and Megan, both coaches, both amazing coaches that have a very long list of incredible athletes, all abilities, front, back of the pack, everything. You every week post to the SWAP Facebook group like a list of just amazing accomplishments that members of the SWAP community did this last week. And I love that it's not just, this individual and this individual won this race and got second place or that sort of thing, but it includes people who maybe run their first distance or finished a 50 miler that was an extreme heat or something. Who cares if they were, last place or front of the pack or any of that? It highlights a lot of athletes at varying levels and skills and paths in their life. But one thing that I am just now realizing is that for you as a coach, it's probably really interesting and much more fulfilling to see the journey of an athlete rather than just the result. And in a sport where I think so many people are graded on their results, whether that's a time or it's a place, I think the journey for you get to see it. You get to see when they start with you, you get to see the entire roller coaster of whatever that journey might be. And you get to see what I'm not going to say the end, because a race isn't the end. If anything, like you say, a race is a celebration. I think it's a fascinating thing that I just maybe I haven't really realized. Coaches, I would always imagine coaches are looking at the results rather than the journey.
Yeah, I mean, and I think every coach almost gravitates towards this over time. Like, there's a reason Ted Lasso is about a coach, and like if you notice in those race posts, often I'll refer kind of like obliquely to obstacles or things that like in those words, which I try not to tell anyone else's story beyond things that are public, obviously, is so much. It's so much story. It's the most beautiful human experience you could ever imagine. And I think the reason that so many coaches become like mini stoic Buddhists is because when you see life zoomed out like this and see all the things that humans are capable of, including people that might be watching this right now, they're in the lowest depths and can't see past where they're at. If that person can just be given the slightest little tailwind, it doesn't have to be by a coach. It can be by, a partner. It can be by themselves figuring something out with a therapist. It can be with medication. It can be with anything. It's like people are capable of so fucking much all the time and everything. And it's like, my God, if people could just get a glimpse into that sort of thing that Megan and I get to see all the time, or I'm sure teachers get to see, or therapists or other things, it's from the ultimate weight off my shoulders. If anything, it makes me feel invincible. It makes me feel like I can do anything by association. So, I've been dragged sometimes online for like using words like amazing and inspiration. And I'm like, what other words are there for it? Like, that is the whole idea. And so, I'm carrying around this amazing inspiration, like it's like a little saddlebag of courage that I just get to dip into in my own life. So, it's definitely a privilege. And I think, the hard part for people that might be watching this is that that perspective is not something our brains are necessarily used to. We're trapped inside our own heads, right? Our own narratives. We are the piece of shit at the center of the universe, as they say. And with that in mind, it can be really hard to see outside yourself and understand just how incredible you are. But gosh, that's the main thing I'm trying to convey to people is getting through in these journeys and all this stuff, with running being like a microcosm of that, just absolutely bonkers.
Well said, David. We're going to wrap up our main show with David Roche. Now we are going to move into the after show. We don't want to keep David too much longer, but if you had a question that did not get asked during today's show, don't worry. We do bring David on fairly regularly for these Ask Coach Roche segments, and we'll be happy to have you back to ask that question again. Or, as I mentioned, we are going to move into the after show with David, and we basically rapid fire through the questions that didn't get asked during the main show. It's a great way to get your question asked there. So consider joining us over at patreon.com/thegingerrunner. But before we move into the after show, David, again, thank you for joining us tonight. These episodes, without fail, just continue to keep us fueled. It's like showing up with empty batteries and you're the Tesla charger and you just plugged into us and you just gave us the supercharge.
It's like we're the Psalms and you like delivered a fresh crate of wine to us.
You are the garden hose to our fresh concrete flavor. It's amazing.
How are my insides looking to you right now? Are they good? Are they
still pizza? Still a little pizza, still a little cereal.
A little bit of concrete.
A little bit of concrete. But a lot of love.
Yeah, a lot of it.
Can you remind people where they can find you on social media, online? And there were many comments in the chat in regards to you as a coach. And I didn't want to move it here, but
I think
did I scroll by it? Oh, Eric says,
yeah.
And even if David Roche doesn't have availability to take on new runners, he absolutely crushes it on recommending other amazing coaches. So thank you so much, David, for that. But David, I'll let you take the stage and just say what you need to say to wrap up.
Well, if Some Work Well Play podcast, Megan and I just shoot the crap on life. I believe tomorrow's episode is going to have a whole big thing about comparing sex and running. So you might want to make that your first one. But more broadly, like, I just want to use this time to emphasize, like, when I talk about that zoomed out perspective I see in coaching right now, I'm seeing, people that are dealing with fires, people that are dealing with like world tragedy, like what's happening in Afghanistan. People that are dealing with this, a little bit of just background generalized anxiety that comes with being human. And if you are feeling that, whether it amounts to something that's like a chemical imbalance that needs to get antidepressants, or just something that makes you feel a little bit on edge, know that you aren't just not alone. You are looking at the world in the most logical and rational way possible. And so what's the path forward from there? The first thing is accepting that those feelings aren't just normal, they're what makes you human. So the very same thing that lets you see existence for what it is also going to give you some anxiety especially in times like this, especially as Bo Burnham would say in the modern amalgamation of what goes into being like on the internet. But then what are the next steps after that? And like, obviously I don't have answers for that, but all I'll say is really encourage you to try to choose laughter as much as you possibly can. So tomorrow, if you're at all compelled by that, just try to laugh at things just a little bit more. I mean, not even funny things. Like laugh at like whatever you possibly can. I read that a lot of adults only laugh a few times a day. Like that's just normal. Whereas kids laugh hundreds of times. And I think that is basically the loss of everything that makes this like existence relatively tolerable in the tough times. So it's something I'm going to be working on too. So let's all try to like get out there and laugh a little bit harder about our running, about our relationships, about TV we see, and also just about like death and all the shit that comes with it. So love you all so much. I appreciate you giving me the indulgence to make pseudo philosophical statements about laughter, and I appreciate this platform so much.
We wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, we're so honored and
yeah,
I don't know. I could label this with 1,000 adjectives, but being able to bring David onto the show regularly and being able to communicate with David regularly is such a privilege because he is exactly who you see on this show. He is incredibly inspiring and wonderful and supportive and fills any void that you might have. If you question anything about yourself, David has just been so great about putting that fire out and allowing you to be who you are without judgment, allow yourself grace, and make us stronger and better humans in the process. So let this...
One more time, though, before we go, we need to really get to the bottom. First responders. Like, what?
That's all the time that we have. Unfortunately, David just left. I don't know what happened. That signal just ended. We are going to wrap up our main show with David Roche. We are we're thankful to have him on tonight and in the future, of course, and in the past episodes. Plenty of past episodes to go watch. This is the 11th Ask Coach Roche, so there's 10 more previous plus his other appearances, and Megan makes appearances from time to time as well. But we are going to move into our after show. Before we do like to recommend or recognize members of the community. We call it our GR Crew Member of the Week, where we get to shout out people who go above and beyond, who do amazing things. Kim, who is this week's GR Crew Member?
So this week's GR Crew Member of the Week is Brian Fagundis. And this was actually from last weekend, but Brian wrote and said, dang, GR Crew be busy this weekend. Stoked for you all. Brian also goes on to say, I too got out to play in the mountains and set an FKT in the process.
Damn.
So I believe the FKT was Mini Mineral King Loop unsupported FKT. So congratulations, Brian. Brian also continued on to say, thanks to all the positive vibes, empowering joy this group brings. So congratulations,
amazing.
Brian.
Congratulations, Brian. Way to get it done. And new FKT. Like, that's pretty dang awesome. We're going to go right into our after show with David Roche. Again, a big thank you to him joining us tonight. And thank you for joining us as well. We'll see you tomorrow for Daily Brew if you are joining us over on patreon.com/thegingerrunner. Otherwise, we'll see you next week for more Ginger Runner Live. Get out there, train hard, race harder, part of the hardest. Thanks all.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye.
Ginger